Good afternoon, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Ma'am, we can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself from your side. You are not audible at all.
It is unmute, right? I think it is unmute. What's the problem? I have not muted my microphone. Hello? Hello?
Ma'am, we can't hear you.
Have you muted everybody? Have you muted everybody?
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes. Wait.
Hello,
Hello?
ma'am.
I can hear you, but
No, you are not audible at all. Or else you can join from. Just check your volume, ma'am.
yes. Yeah, volume is
Or else
fine.
you disconnect and join again.
Okay, volume at the maximum, and I have not unmuted it. Uh,
You have not muted.
uh it is
Then, ma'am,
on.
you disconnect and join again.
Okay, sure. Wait. Yes, am I audible now? Hello, am I audible now? Dr. Tripathi,
ତାଙ୍କର ସବୁଆଡେ problem ଅଛି ବୋଧେ.
am I audible now?
No, ma'am, you are not audible at all. Ma'am, you can join from your mobile then.
No. How do I share my PPT?
Yeah, ma'am, you please share. Say mobile को join कले PPT केमते share करिवे?
I think it was working even earlier. Also, I've seen my. I haven't. What's the problem?
Ma'am, you can send your PPT to us.
Mm-hmm. Give me a sec. I'll fix it. Okay. Daddy? Hello? Hello, microphone. వీడియో ఆపేశారా ఇది ఆన్లోనే ఉంది కదా
అన్మ్యూట్
ఇది అన్మ్యూట్ ఎక్కడ టర్న్ ఆఫ్ అన్నది
జాయిన్ విత్ మైక్రోఫోన్ వచ్చిందా జాయిన్ విత్ కంప్యూటర్ ఆడియో వచ్చిందా
Problem is with us then. Check कर लो देखिए.
ఇదిగో చూడు ఇట్స్ ఆన్ మైక్రోఫోన్ ఈజ్ ఆన్ ఇట్ వర్క్డ్ ఎర్లియర్ కదా మార్నింగ్ ఇయర్ ఫోన్స్
పెట్టుకొని చూడు అది వస్తుందా చూడు
I don't know ఎటువంటి అది
Hello, Lakshmi ma'am. Please join.
Yeah, I've joined.
Sure,
Yes.
sure.
Close the door.
Ma'am, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear. I can hear.
Yeah, ma'am, we can hear you now. We can hear you.
Right. So problem is at your end.
Yes, ma'am. Extremely sorry for that, ma'am. Extremely sorry.
Because I was wondering, my husband was in a call, a video call, whole morning. It was fine working. What happened suddenly?
But it's good, ma'am. I'm so glad that I met you finally, though in the virtual mode. And we are eager, dying to see you for the BOS meeting physically when you will be here with us in Koraput. And trust me, you are going to love this place.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Uh, my dear students, the Department of English Language and Literature, my dear faculty members, the person who is concerned with the ICT team, he has been doing a great job for all the online such sessions that we have been conducting so far. So I welcome uh, Rashmi for the same. And let me introduce the speaker of the day. She's a great and wonderful lady. One thing I should mention about her from the beginning, that I respect her simplicity. Even though she holds a very high profile and she has so many publications, but still she's so down to earth. She's so approachable and so soft spoken. Every time I communicated to her over phone, not even for a second I realized that I'm talking to such a person who is holding such a high profile. And I should thank you from the bottom of my heart, ma'am. And I'm really learning from you. No wonder my father and very great people have told that the more the person grows in their life, they learn more and more to become simple. And that is the real identity of a successful person. So I introduce here to the audience Professor Lakshmi Haribandi. She is the head Department of Translation Studies and also the Dean School of Literary Studies at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, Telangana, India. She did her postgraduate diploma in teaching of English, PGDTE, MA in literature, and PhD from CIEFL, now we call it EFLU, and has been teaching in the Department of Translation Studies for the past 27 years. Her area of specialization is translation studies. She has to her credit 4 books and 35 research articles dealing with various aspects of translation studies and several translations of short fiction from Telugu to English and vice versa. Under her research supervision, 14 PhD and 3 MPhil degrees were awarded so far. She is also an assessor for NAC and visited over 20 colleges and universities as member coordinator. So, my dear students and my department, today we have with us a great personality who has already covered much in the field of translation. Dear ma'am, I would like to mention over here that you were the first person in the field of translation study I chose because our department is completely now into translation. With the suggestion and advice of our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Tripathi, we have started a translation work. Madhusudan Das, a famous writer from Orissa, we have a collection of his poems, prose, speeches, and other literary works. And we have been assigned by our Honorable Vice Chancellor that our department, not just the faculty members, the students should translate it. But it is not an easy task because sometimes, even as faculty members, it is not everybody's cup of tea to translate a book, and that to a classical writing of a person like Madhusudan Das. So our vice chancellor suggested that we teachers can guide the students because as such they have a paper of translation in MA. So that will help them. So what we are doing is we are teaching them the theories, forms, aspects of translation in the class, and we are putting it into practice when they are translating these words. So for that, I thought you will be the right, appropriate person who can not only teach our students and tell them the principles, the rules, and the ways, the methods of translation, but also you can help us in guiding our syllabus. So you are also in our board of studies because we are really diving into translation, which is, again, I will mention, not an easy task. So you are a great resource person for our department. And today she will deal with her topic, literary studies, culture and issues, literary translations. So from here, madam, I hand over the mic to you. And we are looking forward for a wonderful session. And one thing I would like to mention, she earlier had a different topic, but when I discussed about the things that we are dealing in the papers in our department in translation, she said, no, I'm going to change or modify my title a little because that will help the students. So whatever she is going to speak to us, discuss with us in this open forum is going to help us whenever we are, going into translation. So while translating this book also, her theories and approaches will help us a lot. So from here, ma'am, I hand over the mic to you. We also have many students who have participated online. So I welcome them all. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tripathi. Nidja Harini Tripathi. I'm sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So, good afternoon and pranam. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Tripathi, and Dean School of Languages, Professor Panda, and Dr. Nidja Harini Tripathi, Head Department of English Language and Literature, and my dear colleagues and dear students. It's a great opportunity given to me to meet you all online for today's talk, and for that I thank Dr. Tripathi for giving me this opportunity. And first of all, I have to thank her for another thing, all that great introduction she had given me. I don't know whether I deserve all that or not, but she has
Of
gave a
course, you
nice
deserve.
introduction of me to you. So, okay, in today's, as she mentioned, in today's talk, I'm going to talk about some key aspects of translation in general and literary translation in particular, because as I understand from your teacher or from Dr. Tripathi that most of you are engaged in translation at the moment. So I thought I would make it relevant to you, to your task at present. So I'll take around 45 minutes and then we can have a discussion. And I would want you people to share your experience of translating, because you are right now doing translation from Odia into English, and you can share your experience. You can also share your experience of reading translated works, because in most of the universities in MA you have Russian literature English translation, Greek literature English translation, or it could be Indian literature in English translation. So, what is your experience of reading literature in translation? So, we can have a discussion at the end. So, I'll share my PPT. Where is this present? Yes. Uh, yes. I'm trying to present my PPT. What does it say? No, no, no. Why is it presenting my video call here?
Ma'am, we can see the Gmail email part on
Yeah,
our.
yeah, even I could see, but if I
Yeah.
close it, I might log off from the video call. I
Ma'am,
was
you
thinking.
take your time. You take your time. Ma'am, you can minimize it, ma'am. Ma'am, you can minimize the screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I'll have to go back. I have opened my PPT, but okay. I think.
Ma'am, you can just minimize your email.
Ah,
Then you can open your PPT. You have to minimize your email first, ma'am. You have
okay.
to minimize the screen.
I think I'm not there. No, am I there?
Ma'am, we can see you, but we can't see the PPT.
Yeah. Now, okay. Oh, it is open. If I maybe I can't. Interest. Yeah, I forgot the process. I used to take classes through Google Meet only. Like now, I have to open my PPT, right, and then present it.
Yeah. Yes,
That,
ma'am.
that's I have to open the file first. Is it so?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'll try that way. But it is only saying inbox. Why is it saying inbox? Otherwise, I think I'll send it to you now. Okay, shall I?
Yes, ma'am. You send it to us.
Okay.
Ma'am, you just email us.
Yeah, yeah.
Ma'am, I'm just sending a link. I mean, yes, a link in your WhatsApp, and you can send your PPT in that. We will open it here.
Not to your mobile. I mean, not to your mail. I'm
Yes,
sending it
ma'am.
to your mail.
You can send it to my email ID, the same
Okay.
email ID that you have.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sending it.
You send it to my email ID, ma'am. I
Okay.
can operate from here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that will be easier, ma'am. Need to join for it.
Yeah, I've sent it. Did you receive it?
Yes, ma'am. I received it.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I received it.
Okay.
Ma'am, we can see your PPT now.
I can't see. I can't see.
Ma'am, we will share. Just give us a second. We will share with you. Yeah, can you see it now, ma'am?
No. Yeah. Yes.
PPT. Students, is it visible to you all? Great. Ma'am, we can see your PPT and we can see you also. So we
But,
can start. I
but
hope you can see the PPT.
I can't see my PPT yet. I think it's blank. Some screen is there, but it's blank at the moment. Heading I could see, but what's the problem? If you can see, maybe I can open in my phone and then we can go ahead instead of wasting time.
Slideshow class.
I can't see.
Slideshow. Ma'am, can you see it now?
No, I can't see. The heading is shown, but the screen is blank actually. My heading is there. Literary translation, nature and
Ma'am,
issues.
it is the first slide.
No, no,
Now
no.
we are
Yeah.
in the second slide.
Go
Can
to
you
the
see the second slide now?
No.
Ma'am, the second slide says, yeah.
No, nothing has changed here. That's remains blank. The screen remains blank.
Ma'am, actually, we can see the slide here. So you can start from that side and accordingly we will move these slides here.
That's what I'm opening it in my mobile.
Yes, ma'am, we can do that. No problem, ma'am. Because we are able to read your slides.
Okay. So I'm opening it in my mobile.
Yes, ma'am.
Anyway, sorry for all that. I would have checked it. It's a long time since I had online lectures, and I'm sorry because during the pandemic we used to use only Google Meet for everyday classes.
Yes, ma'am.
But yeah, some problem. Okay. Anyway, so as I mentioned, some of the important elements that are involved in any translation, I would like to introduce to you first, and then some of the serious issues that come to the fore when we are dealing with literary texts, translation of literary text either from your mother tongue into English or vice versa. We will discuss here. And as your ma'am explained, you have a paper on translation. She said translation, but all of you know the difference between translation and translation studies. We are the Department of Translation Studies. Translation Studies deals with various aspects related to translation. It doesn't do with the actual practical translation, but all the aspects that surround the translation we deal with. We do research. We have only PhD program in translation studies. Well, 2 years ago we started PG diploma in translation where we give practical training. Otherwise, we are more into research related to various aspects of translation. Okay, so translation studies is the one that deals with issues, problems, processes, etc., related to translation. Because sometimes when I go to other universities, when I say I'm the head of the department, I'm a professor there, how many languages do you know? From which language do you translate? This is what they ask. Because we are not actual practical translators. That's not the agenda of the department. We are a research institute, research department. We research into various aspects that are relevant to any translation practice. So, as you know, theory and practice are related. Theory really helps you. Actually, first theory comes out of practice. It doesn't come from vacuum. It is the outcome of practice. By looking at certain translations, translated works, we arrive at some theory, and theory in turn will help those beginners like you. If you are aware of some theories and theoretical, if you have some theoretical knowledge, you can better handle your translation. Okay, so with this introduction, I think I'll begin. So the first thing, first student at the first class, this is what we tell them. the three different types of translation by Roman Jacobson. I'm sure all of you must be familiar with this. Now it's opening. Now it is on screen. I can see my
Uh,
screen.
can you
I
see
can.
the screen?
Yes, I can operate it myself.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Technical issues will always be there, ma'am.
But then
Finally,
they
this
have to
is
get resolved, no? Right? Even if they take 2-3 minutes. Okay. So, second slide, please. Second one. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah. So all of you must be familiar with Roman Jacobson's classification of translation into three types. You must have read his famous article of 5 pages published in 1958 on linguistic aspects of translation. Actually, every translation studies student begins his learning from this article. So there, in that article, Roman Jacobson classifies translation into three types. Otherwise, generally you say translation is always from one language into another. That is the understanding we people have. But then there are other types which are possible. So the second one, interlingual translation, is translation proper. That is from one language into another. But the first one, say intralingual translation. As students of languages, you know intralingual. Within the language. Within the language also, it's possible. Within the one language, rather than between two languages, you can always go for translation. For instance, if you translate something, for instance, Shakespeare's play, for instance, if you translate from his English into modern contemporary English, it will be a translation. So you're not changing the language, but within the language, there are different kinds of signs, a different kind of language you are using within the same language. Any interpretation of the earlier work within the same language is also intralingual translation. All our abridged works and simplified works we read in our syllabi also are intralingual translations. Within the language, we have intralingual translation, and interlingual is a translation proper where two languages are involved, the source language and the target language. And then the intersemiotic translation, this is the most important one right now. Most people are doing research in this area. This is, as you know, from one sign system into another, semiotics, one sign system into another. In Roman Jacobson's words, he says verbal into non-verbal. For instance, verbal is language, words and sentences. From text, verbal text, linguistic text into audiovisual text, for instance, is an intersemantic translation. Now, if you look at all the films made out of novels or short stories, are adapted into movies, then that is an intersemantic translation. In anything that is from verbal into non-verbal, text into music or painting or drawing, anything is a non intersemiotic translation, because you are operating between two semiotic systems. See, language itself is one sign system. If you are translating from one language into another, within the same sign system you are working. But intersemiotic translation between two sign systems, verbal into non-verbal, non-verbal into verbal, is also possible. So all your film adaptations come under intersemiotic translation. Okay, so but as I understand, all of you are doing interlingual translation between two languages. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Huh. So this is Peter Newmark. I'm sure you are familiar with this name. He has done a lot of work. The earliest translation study scholars. He comes under linguistic paradigm. So this is what he says: an old fool can learn a language, but it takes an intelligent person to become a translator. All of you are intelligent people. That's why you are doing translation. So, but what is the difference? Like, can we say every bilingual can be a translator or a potential translator? All that you need is, you need to know two languages, then you can be a translator. Can we take it for granted that all bilinguals can be translators? No. It requires something else. See, in languages, we say if you know the language, that means you have acquired the four basic skills. LSRW, we say listening, reading, speaking, and listening. If you have all these four skills, you know the language. But translation requires a fifth skill. In addition to these four, you need to have another skill that is called translation competence. Can we move on to the next one? Next slide, please. Yeah. So that fifth skill, you can consider this as a fifth skill apart from four language skills. This is called translation competence. So what does it comprise? So, see, I have given here. These six skills are subsumed under translation competence. The first one, of course, it goes without saying, linguistic competence. You should have high proficiency in both the languages, your source language and target language. Maybe native command or near native command you should have with the language, both the languages. The second thing is cultural competence, because you have to be bilingual and bicultural. Without knowing the culture, how can you understand? You have to be familiar with the cultures of both the languages. So you need to have cultural competence too. Okay, so these two are required prerequisites for any translator. Okay, you have to be bilingual and bicultural. And the third one is textual competence. See, each text is written in a particular way. The way we write a scientific text is different from the way we write a technical text or a medical text or a journalistic text. Each text, each register, for instance, has its own form, the kind of language we use, the kind of tense we use, the format, etc., legal language. Okay, so you have to be familiar, if you are a scientific translator, how scientific texts are written in your source language, in your target language, what kind of tense is used, what is the format, etc. All that you should be familiar. Then only you can translate. And the next one is subject specific competence. Of course, this domain specific knowledge is very important. Without knowing the subject, you cannot translate. If you are translating a medical text, for instance, if you don't know the subject, the medical terms and terminology, etc., even if you have linguistic competence and communicative cultural competence, you cannot translate that jargon and the terminology. You should be familiar with. So subject specific or domain specific knowledge is important for any translator. And then research competence. Why do we say research competence? Where is research? Because translation is not a simple easy transfer from one language into another. It's a very complex process. There are many things that are involved in it. There will be many issues, problems. You will have to negotiate many things in your translation, and for many things you may not find ready-made equivalents in the other language. So how to negotiate how to translate a particular word if it doesn't, or word or expression if it doesn't have an equivalent? What are the options you have? How can you do justice to the source? All that you need to have that kind of a research skill also. And then the last one is transfer competence. Once you understand the text, you have to put it in another language. See, many of my students, they say, I know, ma'am, what the text says, but I don't know how to put it in the other language, how to put it in my language. When they are translating from English, they understand everything, what the text says, but then they don't know how to put it in the other language. Okay, the transfer competence is equally important. That's a major thing. And I must tell you here, all of us ignore our mother tongue. We pay a lot of attention to English and improving our English skills and all, but mother tongue, okay, we take it for granted. Oh, it's my mother tongue, I don't have to do it, I know my mother tongue. But then when it comes to translation, when you are translating now, of course you are translating from Oriya into English, but if you take up any translation from English into your mother tongue, you realize that how inadequate your knowledge of your mother tongue. And then there is always a need to improve our mother tongue. Okay, every day you read the Telugu journal, your language journals or media newspapers, etc., to improve your mother tongue. One is terminology. You don't know, because we most of the time we use English and we don't know. Our mother tongue gets confined to a certain domains or sometimes even to kitchen language. So this transfer competence is very important. Unless you know how to put it properly in an acceptable manner in the target language, your translation will not be accepted by your target audience. Can, can we move on to the next slide, please? Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. So, yeah, this is original creation vis-a-vis translation. So all of us know, I don't have to say how original creation is easier when compared to translation, because you don't have any constraints or limitations. If you're writing your own work, you freely express your thoughts, opinions, etc. But then when it comes to translation, you have many constraints imposed on you by the source text and the source writer and the source language. So there are certain boundaries. So within those boundaries, you have to translate. You do have some freedom to express, but then there are always some limitations. Okay, so That's why Holmes, this is another name, another translation studies scholar. He is considered to be James Hess Holmes. He's considered to be the father of translation studies. His seminal article, The Name and Nature of Translation Studies, because in this article he was the one who suggested this name translation studies to this field. That's why he is considered as the father of translation studies. So he says, while we are translating, it's actually translation process is actually a multi-level process. How, while we are translating sentences, we take a map of the entire original text in our mind, and at the same time a map of the kind of text we want to produce in the target language. You see, when, because you are all translating, even if you know the entire text, see, as a translator you have to read the entire source text many times in order to understand it properly before you start translating. But once you start translating, you, most of us generally go by sentence. So sentence becomes your unit of translation. Every time you take a sentence and translate sentence after sentence, you go on translating. But it doesn't mean that sentences are translated in isolation. You have the whole map of the source text in your mind. You know what are the interrelations between the sentence you are translating and what goes before it, after it. You have the entire comprehension of the whole text. And then when it comes to actual translation, you take sentence after sentence. Okay, so, and then you also have to think of your target text, what kind of shape it is going to take, what kind of shape you want to give to your target text. Okay, so you see, when you are writing something of your own, you don't have to think of your readership always. It's like self-expression. You want to express, you felt, you want to express your emotion or something. It's not meant for anybody maybe, but when you are translating, you have to think of your target audience. Without that you cannot, because different translations are required for different target audience. So you have to decide for whom you are translating, for whose benefit you are translating this particular text at this moment. So thinking of their acceptability, their convenience, their target culture, etc., etc., you will have to choose an appropriate strategy of translation. Okay, so it's like a double bind. You see, both the source text is important and the target text, both the extremes. So you have to do take a middle path between the source text and source culture, and target text and the target culture. So that's a challenge. Okay, then next slide please. Huh. This is another thing I want you to pay some attention to. See, any translation, most translations, for instance, they are substitutes for the original text. See, when do you translate something into another language? It's for the benefit of those people who do not know the source language, who do not have access to the source language. If you translate an English text into Odia or Hindi, it is meant for those people who can't read it in English. So you are helping them by translating it into their language. So basically, any translation serves as a substitute for the original text for the monolingual target readers. Okay, so here, because of this, there's a heavy responsibility lies on the translator. Translator becomes crucial because they don't know what the source says. Only it is the critics and bilinguals who would go through your translation and compare it with the source and say how you have done, whether you have done a good job or a bad job. But your target audience, the monolingual target readers, they don't know what the source text. So if you have translated Shakespeare's Hamlet, they think that that is what Shakespeare has written. You might have changed many things. You might have missed many things. Okay, so it may not be Shakespeare. It must be you, but they don't know. So you have to take care of that. You are representing another text in the target language. Okay, so, and then when it comes to quality of the translation, of course the quality of translation depends on the translator, because after all said and done, the translator is the creator of the target text. So whether it is good or bad, whatever, the quality depends on the competence of the translator, the ability of the translator. So the more competent the translator, the better the translation. Okay, so you have a heavy responsibility as a translator. You should be aware of various aspects that are related to any practical aspect, and then do it with the conscious. Yeah. Next slide, please. Huh. And also, sometimes you come across some translations, though title might say it is a translation from some text, you don't find any resemblance between the two. Absolutely no resemblance. It looks like an independent work written in the target language, though it says it is a translation of a foreign text. See, if somebody exercises a lot of freedom and changes everything, goes for to use Sujit Mukherjee's words like new writing or okay, rewriting of the text. If you rewrite it and then it becomes an independent text, it doesn't become a translation. So if you call something as a translation of another text, it needs to have some similarity, some identity, some resemblance with the source text. Okay, so otherwise it's not actually. In translation studies, this is one major problem. How do we draw a line? What is a translation? What is not a translation? When a translation becomes not a translation, how do you draw that line? Okay, so how much freedom can a translator exercise? If it is too much, where you draw the line? Okay, so how much becomes too much? How much freedom becomes too much? So that the text will not have any resemblance whatsoever with the source. Some people jokingly talk about some translations. They say there's no identity left between this. Yeah. They say the translator should leave a note at the beginning saying that any identity left between this and its source is only accidental. So they have to leave a note like that. Otherwise, it is absolutely a different text and it has no relation. Okay, any identity between the two, it is only accidental. Okay, but it should not be like that. See, translator is a translator. You are a translator, but not the original writer. If you really want to write an original work, you can write an original work. If you say this is a translation of such and such a source text, and it has to have that resemblance, it has to represent that text in the other language. Okay, in this case, I would also like to draw your attention to two other translations. One is pseudo translations, like going by the word, it is self-explanatory. Something that is presented as a translation, but not a translation. It's a pseudo translation. Okay, some people write their own and present it as a translation of a foreign text. But you may ask, see, original writers are given more respect. Okay, in the society they have more value and original writing is given more importance than a translation. But then why do they fake it? They present their own writing as a translation. They can present it as their own writing and then can take the credit instead of presenting it as a translation. There are various reasons for that. If you like, I can tell you one or two, but we can always go back to Gideon Turi's descriptive translation studies and beyond. There is one chapter on pseudo translations. He explains this with case studies. Okay, so some people resort to it when they want to go against the trend. If there is some trend going on in your literature, Odia literature, for instance, at a certain period, there is some trend. Every writer has to follow that trend, but somebody wants to go against it. So you will be criticized. Your text may not be accepted. There will be censor, things like that. To avoid all that, you just say it's a translation. Then translators have that kind of freedom, that kind of license. Oh, he's only a translator. It's not his writing. He's only a last. It's okay. Okay. For that reason, they introduce new things, new themes, new concepts, new genres by going for this method. Okay. But then many pseudo translations might exist even in our languages, our literatures. But who knows? For hundred years, 200 years, nobody could detect it. It's a there was no original. It's not easy because primarily you can say if there is no source text, it is a translation. But for many translations, source texts are not existent. For instance, we say Panchatantra stories. We have several translations, but where is the original thing? Okay, we say it's Vishnu Sharma who has written, but yes, does anyone has that copy of the original text written by Vishnu Sharma? No. Vishnu Sharma? No, we don't have. We have several translations of it. So it's a very difficult to identify a translation as a pseudo translation. Okay. Anyway, that is one. But it's very interesting to read how historically in different cultural contexts people have resorted to this practice for with a particular aim. So I wish you could read it. Okay, then the concealed translations. What are concealed? These are also, I think, very common even in Indian context. People translate from various other languages, but they present it as though it is their own. In the case of movies, I think often people talk about it. Some movie directors copying texts from various movies and hodgepodge of various movies made in Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, etc., etc. Something from this, something from this, and then they cook up a story and they say it's their own. Because of the copyright problem, they just take from different parts from different things and then put it together as if it's their own. Concealed translations. At some point, I think feminist translations were introduced into Indian culture. Some of our writers also resorted to this. They translated text from other languages but presented it as their own original writings. So this is the opposite of pseudo translation. Okay. Then can we move on to the next one? The direction of the translation, the direction, in which direction are you translating? Ideally, in translation studies, it is said you should be translating into a mother tongue. Why do they say you should be translating into your mother tongue? Because we are supposed to have more proficiency in our mother tongue than the other tongue, your L2 or L3. Okay, because of that, they say ideal translation is always into your mother tongue. But it need not necessarily, because nowadays, as you are translating from Odia into English, there is a need for translating Indian literature into English. So we are resorting to the other way around. Okay. So direction of the translation is important, and then we have two other different translations: direct translations and indirect translations. What are direct translations? If you directly translate from an SL into TL, it's a direct translation. Okay, but indirect translation, what is an indirect translation? If you don't know the source language, for instance, you use its translation in English or Hindi, and through that intermediate translation you translate into your mother tongue. For instance, if you translate any Telugu text through its English translation into Odia, that will be an indirect translation. So that is a translation of a translation. From a translation you translate into your language. So why do we and you know how it is twice or thrice removed? I think, shall we go back? I'm still discussing the previous one. Okay, so I'm talking about indirect translations. Okay, why do we need indirect translations? Because we may not get competent translators for all the language pairs to go for direct translations. So rather than having none, we can have even indirect translation. So in the Indian context, most of this Russian literature, German literature, French literature, it has come through its English translations. Even within the Indian context, even Bangla, for instance, Sarat Chandra's writings, all Sarat Chandra's novels have been translated into Telugu through their Hindi translations, not directly from Bangla. May be the case with some of the works of Tagore also. So indirect translation, and you know how indirect translations, the quality of the indirect translations, because they are thrice removed from the original. It all depends on the intermediate translation, how good or how close that translation you take it as your source text. Here, translation serves as a source text for your translation. Okay, so can we move on to the next one? Yeah. Then when you are looking at a translated text, when you are reading a translated text, so these are some of the things you should pay attention to in order to understand the quality of the translation. Okay, who is the translator, and the person's subjectivity and ecology. Where does he come from? Where does he live? What is his profession? How many, whether he knows that language, source language or not. Okay, so you have to know about the translator in order to understand translation. And the second thing is he working alone? Is he or she working alone or in collaboration with another person or persons? Because collaborative translations are also very popular these days. So you have to see. And then if it is, and then is it a collaborative translation between the author and the translator? These also you come across now. Many authors, they want their text to be translated into other languages. They approach the translators, and in collaboration with the translators, they publish themselves in other languages. Okay. Yeah. And this you might think that if you collaborate with the author, with the author, if you collaborate and translate a text, it will be very close to the source and you do justice to the author. It may not be so. Authors themselves give you freedom because they want more and more people to read their text, that text to be accessible to wider audience. So they give the free license to the translator. Okay, you can change here and there, I have no problem. You can change. Okay, they give more license to the translator. Okay, otherwise, if you are independently translating an author, you will be very careful. But if you are working with an author, with the author's permission, you can change anything. Okay. Then whether the translator is a native speaker of the source language or the target language. This is an important issue when you are looking at a translation, whether the translator is a native speaker of the source language or the target language. Like now in your case, maybe you people are the native speakers of the source language. So you understand the source language very well, every bit of it, but there may be problems in expressing it in English in your, okay. So then is it a self-commissioned translation or one commissioned by some publisher or agency? You know, self-commissioned translation, if you read something and you like it, you fall for it, you want to translate it for your own sake, or it's a labor of love or something. Vis-a-vis, if something is commissioned by some agency like Sahitya Academy or NBT or Khatha, anybody approaches you and asks you to translate a particular text, the difference is in a self-commissioned translation, you like the text very much, you want to translate it. But in the commissioned by someone, the text is not selected by you. It's not your selection. Sometimes you may not like the text, but you accept the assignment and you translate it. Okay, so that shows in the quality of the translation also. If it is not your selection, you given a choice, you wouldn't have translated this particular text. Okay, so there will be, you may not put your heart and soul, you may not have empathy with the source writer, etc. All that reflects in your translation. Okay, so always self-commissioned translations, and also there is the intervention of many people. If it is commissioned by somebody, there are many people who intervene, because publishers, reviewers, and language editors and all. Of course, that process is there even in a self-commissioned translation, because after translating, finally you have to, one day you have to get it published by somebody. Then you approach a publisher, and then it will go through the same process. They will back and forth and back and forth. They edit your text and all. Okay, then the final one is it a self-translation? You know the example of Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali, how he translated himself from Bangla into English. So self-translation is also called auto-translation. If you translate it yourself, so you are the same person, you are the source writer and you are the translator, but then it need not necessarily be a good one. For instance, you must have read some articles about Rabindranath Tagore's translation of Gitanjali into English, and how he has done injustice to the writer Rabindranath Tagore, the translator Rabindranath Tagore, how he has done injustice to the writer Rabindranath Tagore, how he has changed certain things to make the text suitable to the Western audience, and etc. etc. Okay, the next slide, please. Yeah. This is another point relevant to literary translation. Multiple translations are for any given text. N number of translations are possible, even within the same language. Why? When you have one translation, where is the need for you to go for another translation? See, even if you are aware that this text has already, like Fakir Mohan Senathpati or somebody's translation, if it is already been translated, and again, why do you attempt another translation? Because it differs from person to person. Like, the first thing is, your very understanding is an interpretation. You have to interpret the text in order to understand. So all of us, your understanding of the text is different from my understanding. So whatever way I understood the text, I put it in another language, and whatever way you understand the text, you put it in another way. So your version of it and my version of it, even if we translate into the same language, are different. So multiple translations of especially literary texts are possible, because different interpretations are possible. Different people differently understand the given text, interpret the given text. Therefore, the translations are different. So for any given text, you can have any number of translations. For instance, even Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali, we have in Telugu about 20 different translations, 20 different translations of the same text. Okay. So I think there is one more point I just wanted to say. Yeah, I forgot. I think one more interesting point related to the multiple translations. So literary text, actually, basically a literary text has that scope. When you compare a literary text with a scientific text or a technical text, These are content based texts where the content is important. So as a translator, if you are translating a scientific text, for instance, transferring the context without any ambiguity precisely correctly is important. There is no scope for multiple interpretations. Only if it is a literary text, multiple interpretations are possible. And yeah, this is the point I forgot. The translator, the person who is reading is important. Who is reading the text? Who is translating the text? So your reading is different from my reading. How do we read the text differently? Different people read the text differently. Even if the same text is given in a class to be translated into the same language, all of you come up with different versions, because who is reading it, what is his or her knowledge, okay, what is his choice of style or the language or the form, etc. All this makes a huge difference. That's why for any given translation, and sometimes even if it is a classic and people have going for new translation, 5 6 translations are there, but still a fresh translation is published recently. People say that these translators, when they ask this question, they say, I'm not happy with the existing translations, so I want to give a fresh interpretation to the old text, maybe contemporary interpretation. So I have come up with this new translation, and my translation is the best. They say that. Okay, so it cannot be best. See, in translation studies, or as far as translation is concerned, you cannot say this is the best or this is the last. See, there can be a better translation later on, and there is nothing like the translation of a source text. For instance, if take any text, you cannot say this is the translation. It is one of the various possible translations. N number of translations of a given text are possible, and what you have is one such translation. We can say this is a translation of this text. Okay, any number of translations of the same text are possible within the same language at the same time also. Like there need not be any historical gap. Something translated 100 years and now you are translating into the modern language and all. Simultaneously, synchronously also at the same time, 2 3 people translate the same text. Okay, so here I just want to say all those Vedas, Puranas, or even your Bhagavad Gita, you have different interpretations of the same Bhagavad Gita by different people. I think the Bhagavad Gita is the most translated in the Indian context. In general, in the world, we say the Bible. Bible is the most translated work. But in the Indian context, I think it is Bhagavad Gita, which is most translated, and different versions of it, different interpretations of the text. And they relate it to different aspects of the contemporary life and contemporary society. Even the many management gurus have been using Krishna's teachings and how he motivated Arjuna to go for war and okay, so it seems to Bhagavad Gita seems to have an answer for anything, any contemporary issue. Bhagavad Gita has an answer. Okay, then the process of translation. So Eugene Naida, this is another name. Naida has written many books. Like you may have Theory and Practice of Translation, Bible Translation, The Art of Translation. Many titles of Eugene Naida are available in many libraries. So he has done a lot of work, though his concern was with Bible translation. He was a trainer to Bible translators. So he gives this process of translation. He was the first one to give this process. So analysis, transfer, and restructuring. First of all, you have to analyze the given text. When you are attempting to translate a text, the first thing is you have to analyze. So when you are trying to understand the text, you have to analyze it in terms of not just the content and the plot, etc., theme, but in terms of language, expressions, figurative speech, etc. You have to analyze it properly in order to understand it thoroughly. Then you transfer it. Whatever understanding you arrive at, you have to transfer it into the other language. And then actually Naida says this transfer takes place not on a piece of paper, but in your mind. In translator's mind, this transfer happens. And once you transfer, then you have to restructure it as per the requirement, as per the convenience of your target audience. You have to restructure it in proper style and all other things you arrange, so that your translation will be acceptable to your target audience. Okay, this is the process he gives. And then, do you think translation is an intuitive activity? I think most of us at the beginning we say, even we have many translators, famous translators, successful translators who do not know any theory. So they simply are guided by their intuition. I don't know any theory. I am just guided by my intuition. So translation for many is an intuitive activity. Yes, maybe to some extent it is an intuitive activity if you know both the languages and the cultures. If you have the skill, if you have enough practice, you can. It becomes an intuitive activity. But the moment you say intuitive activity, you're not aware of what you are doing, what decisions you are taking, what choices you are exercising, etc. You're not aware of the process of translation. Only when you are familiar with some translation theory, you know why you are choosing this equivalent instead of another one, or what are the options you have for translating this when it doesn't have an equivalent, and what is the best equivalence that fits the given context, etc. Or that awareness comes, because translation is a decision making process. Various decisions have to be made. So for each decision you should know why you are taking this or that. Okay, for each decision there has to be valid justification. Okay, if somebody asks, you could have used that word, why did you use this word, then you should you should answer that. You should have valid justification for using one word here, one phrase there. Okay, so translation is not an intuitive activity. You should be aware of it. You should be alert to what you are doing. You should be conscious of the entire process. So that is possible only when you are familiar with certain translation theory. Okay, can we move on to the next, please? Next slide, please. Huh. So now coming to issues or problems in translation. The one basic thing is, because of the lack of one-to-one correspondence between the SL and TL, you face many problems. Okay, many issues. See, if there is one-to-one, if there were to be one-to-one correspondence, that is, for every word there is an equivalent word without any problem, we don't need human translators. Any machine, any computer can easily translate if it is one-to-one. For one word of SL, there is clear cut one word in the TL. Machine can do it, but it is not so. Languages do not operate like that. In every language, every word, most of the words maybe have many meanings. Okay. So, in what sense a particular word is employed in a particular context, you have to see. See, beginners go wrong here. If there is something when you are translating a source text, when there is something you don't understand, some word you don't understand, you look up a dictionary, and then even in dictionaries like advanced learners dictionary, they list all the different meanings, giving number 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, most frequently used they give as one, and the least last. But then people just pick up the first one and then use it. See, when a particular word has different meanings, in what sense it is used in a given context. Because when we say every word has many meanings, does it mean that all our conversation is ambiguous? No, it is very clear. We clearly communicate our ideas. How are we doing it? In every given context, a particular word, even if it has 10 meanings, it is used in one particular sense. Okay, it is the context that is decides. That's why in isolation you cannot look at words or sentences. In isolation you cannot. What are the words that go before and come after? These are the ones that modify the meaning of a word. Okay, so the gap between the source and the target is the one that creates certain issues in translation. And one is ambiguity or polysemy, one word having many meanings, which is employed by creative writers to create puns and wordplay. In literature you find puns and wordplay where the writers play with this. Okay, one word has many meanings, they use it deliberately to create some kind of pun or ambiguity. Okay, it depends on how you read it. Two, three readings are possible of the same word. Okay, and in this context, I want to mention about these false friends. False friends, the word itself explains. They look like friends, but they are false friends. See, this is related to lexical cognates. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Next slide. So when we say lexical cognates, for instance, here we most of our languages borrowed words from Sanskrit, but then over a period of time they develop different meanings. Okay, these are lexical cognates. Originated here. I have given false friends between Hindi and Telugu. So you can see Upanyas is a novel in Hindi, but Telugu a lecture, which it is proper or right in Hindi, but Telugu, if we say Vichitam, it's free. and Rajkiya is government in Hindi, but in Telugu political. Last week I went to a college in Uttarakhand, and it said Rajkiya Snatakochara Mahavidyalay. So I didn't know what it means until I went there and asked those people, because Rajkiya for me is political. They said Rajkiya is government. It means government postgraduate college. It's very simple, but I understood as Rajkiya Snatakochara Mahavidyalaya. Snatakochara is postgraduate for them. For us in Telugu, we say Snatakam, Snatakocharam is convocation. So these are cognates derived from the same parent language but develop different meanings. So other examples you can see, and you can see, you can check your language also whether it has any of these false friends with other languages that it is in contact with, or Hindi or Sanskrit. Okay, can be moved, and these are the false friends here. See, these are very tricky, and unless the translator is aware of the difference, then he or she would misinterpret it, because that, oh, openness is there even in my language, and then I would translate it as a lecture, but in the Hindi it is a novel. So that's how they mislead the translator. Okay, so unless you are aware that these are false friends, so they mean different things in these two languages, you will go wrong. Okay, these are traps that there are there in languages which are related. Okay, next slide please. So this is the major problem. Any cross-cultural translation from one culture into another, the one you are translating also, what are the issues that crop up? Why cross-cultural translation is difficult than intra-cultural translation? For instance, when you compare your translation from Odia into English with the translation from Odia into Bangla or Odia into any other language, would be easier. Why, when you are translating from Odia into English, it's more problematic, or you pay more attention, more issues crop up, and you should know how to negotiate all these things, because the cultural difference between the two languages. See, language and culture, they are inseparable, that. Okay, you cannot say I'm only translating the language but not the culture. Language itself is, okay, embedded within a particular culture. You cannot separate language from its culture. Okay, so whenever every translation involves even the transfer of a culture. So when there is a cultural gap between the source language and the target language, certain issues crop up in translation, and then they lead to, when you don't have an equivalent, for instance, for a certain word and expression or cultural expression of the source, you don't have an equivalent in the target language, it leads to untranslatability. For most of the things, cultural aspects we may not have, because if it is a cross cultural translation, our culture is different from that culture and we don't have equivalents. Okay, so something becomes untranslatable. And of course, idioms and proverbs are also culture specific. There, so you have a set of idioms and proverbs in your language which are specific to your culture. Another language may have its own, so you cannot find equivalents for them. And also, you cannot literally translate them. Sometimes literal translation might be meaningful. Sometimes literal translation will give a different meaning. Okay, and then this second point I want you to note. See, words have denotation and connotation. Denotative meaning is a referential meaning, what they mean. Connotation is associative meaning. All of us associate certain meanings to certain words. These could be personal. Okay, at the cultural level, personal level, we associate certain special associative meanings to certain words. Okay, so you have to be aware of the connotative meaning of certain words or expressions in the source language or the target language. Now, if you're translating into English, for certain words, is there any connotative meaning which might make my meaning different, understanding different? Denotation is easy. Referential meaning, any dictionary will give you what a word means, but connotation is difficult. Different, same word might have different connotative meanings to different people, so you should be aware of it. And then one thing is, see, when a word is used both in a denotative meaning and a connotative meaning, or only in emphasis on connotative meaning, you can sacrifice denotation for connotation, but not vice versa. You can sacrifice denotative meaning for connotative meaning. It means you give more importance to connotation than denotation. Okay, so you have to sacrifice. When there is this conflict, you will go for connotation, translating the connotative meaning into the other language. Okay, next slide. These are some of the issues that come up when we are translating from Indian language into English. See, the honorific plurals. In English, we don't have, you say you to everyone, but in Hindi also, we have tu, tum, and op. In Telugu, we have many. Okay, so this might create a problem, and so and then, and then in our languages, we have elaborate kinship terms. Okay, very elaborately for every relation. In most of the languages, we have a different lexical item. We don't have to modify like elder brother or younger sister. We have different lexical items for each relationship, okay, which English doesn't have. So you have to modify, but then sometimes they lead to confusion if the context doesn't, like if you have to translate brother into elder brother or younger brother, because you have a specific term. You don't have a word like common word like sodara or something Sanskrit word, but you have elder brother one word and younger brother. So, but in English it says only brother, and you don't know whether it is younger or elder. Okay, such things will create problems. Okay. Um, then our dress code, all this you retain. Most of the things that are related to your dress or our food, idli, upma, dosa, all this we retain when you are translating into English. And even our Indian writers in English used to add an end note explaining all these food items, etc., etc. Whatever terms that are retained from our culture, they would add an explanation for the benefit of those who are not familiar with them. Our customs and traditions, even the names of the festivals and all, we say Dasara, Diwali and all, they don't know, they don't mean anything for somebody who doesn't know anything about our culture. Okay. All the religious elements or religious references, like he is like a Rama, he is like Krishna, if you say he is like Kumbhakarna, if you say he is like a Bhima, if you say the simile, if they don't know what is Bhima stands for, what does Arjuna stands for, if they don't know, they don't understand what you are trying to say here. Okay. And also our flora and fauna, these are highly culture specific, certain flowers and certain animals that you have in your climate, in your surroundings, may not be there in other places. So they create untranslatability. You have to retain the source terms, and then maybe if necessary you have to add a footnote or an endnote. Or these days I think it's easy to give a picture, so that a picture speaks well. Rather than explaining it in two paragraphs, you can just give the picture. Okay, next slide please. I think I'm taking more time, Dr. Tripathi. Can I, do you want me to finish my slides?
Absolutely all right. Take your time.
Okay, so people are patient. Sorry, I'm testing your patience. I'm sorry, students. I'll ask the students. Would you like to listen to me further, or would you like to stop me and we can have another session? I want the students.
And here I am with the students.
Yeah. I know I couldn't see the students sitting there.
Yeah, of course, when they all say we should proceed.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. Okay. How many more slides do I have? What is the slide number here? Anyway, quickly I'll
16,
try.
ma'am.
Huh?
Slide
15.
number is 16. We are in slide number 16 right now.
Okay, half. But I'll try to finish as early as possible. Okay, so in translation, another thing that often people talk about, loss and gain. Always people say, okay, any translation there is some loss. Loss is inevitable in any translation. Okay, so I mean, even by your experience, you know, those who can read the source text can never be happy with the translation. You say, oh, original reads so well, so nice, so rich, but this translation, no, a bekar. You say, okay, those who can read source cannot be happy with the translation, but that's not the purpose. You are translating it for somebody who doesn't know the source, right? So here I want to say, of course, it is true. There is some loss. Some loss is inevitable in any translation because of the various reasons we discussed now. So then how do we, when you know that certain things are lost in the translation, in order to do justice to the source text or the source author, what can we do? Are there any compensatory mechanisms or compensatory strategies that we can resort to, so that some loss can be, okay, can be repaid, can be, some gap can be bridged? Okay, so here we talk about gain in translation. For instance, if there is a pun in the source text, and of course pun cannot be translated So you just literally translate somewhere, some way or other, and then where there is no pun in the source, you create a pun in the target language. And where there is no idiom in the source, you create an idiom. Where there is no proverb in the source, you write a proverb. That's how you try to compensate for the loss. Okay, so loss and gain are the important things that are discussed in translation studies. Okay, next slide, please. I have given some examples here. He was a young man of about 5 and 20, that is 25, well grown and well looking with sunburned cheeks. I want you to pay attention to this part. Somebody with sunburned cheeks, will he be well looking? All the boys should tell. Okay, or the girls should tell. If you like well looking, if you say somebody with sunburned cheeks or dark cheeks, do you say he is well looking? Second one is sunny afternoons. She would lift. I have taken from actual text. These two examples, first two examples are from Canadian short stories. Sunny afternoons, she would lift her mother into a wheelchair and put her out in the sun. Okay, these two examples, because our climate is different from the Canadian climate, we cannot translate them literally here. If we say he's good looking with sunburned cheeks, we cannot literally translate. Okay, similarly, sunny afternoon, you can't put a patient in the hot sun. Okay, so because ours is a tropical climate, summers are very hot, we can't do this. And you must be familiar with the Shakespeare's shall I compare thee with the summer's day, a person saying to his beloved, saying that comparing her with a summer's day, it gives an opposite meaning here. Summers are no longer not pleasant here. For them, summers are pleasant because they have extreme weathers, extreme cold in winter and other months, and the summer mild, pleasant summers. So they would compare all good things with summer's day, but we can't do it. It gives an opposite meaning if we literally translate it. So you should be aware of such differences when you are translating literary text. Okay, next slide, please. So I have given just an example, two puns. Is life worth living? If somebody asks you, then the answer can be, well, it depends on the liver. See, look at the liver. It has two meanings here. So you can read it in both the ways. But if you want to translate this into your language, it's very difficult because for the word liver, we have only one meaning. We don't have the other meaning that English has. Okay, similarly for the second example also, who is an ambassador? An ambassador is the one who lies abroad for the good of his country. This is jokingly said. Who lies literally, also metaphorically also, who tells lies and who lives. In both the senses they have used this kind of pun. We can't use because we don't have one equivalent for lie with these two meanings. That's why puns are not and puns are untranslatable. Next slide, please. So yes, your Madam Dr. Tripathi was also saying that how she has translated a text written in a particular Odia dialect into English and all. See, when you translate a literary text from your source, maybe your mother tongue into English, you want to introduce your source culture to the target audience. You want them to be familiar with the sensibilities of your source culture. Okay, so see, that is the advantage of the literary text, right? In the literary text, most of the literary texts are deeply rooted in that culture. So when you want to translate a literary text, you better do justice to the cultural component of the source text. Otherwise, if you domesticate it and write it as though it is originally written in English, you are doing great injustice to the source text. Okay, so most of us, we try to capture the local color, try it, give it the local color. Local color here refers to the source culture. Okay, so we make our translations reflect the source culture. Okay, by retaining the source culture as far as possible, so that the reader gets an opportunity to know something about the source culture. But then here the problem is, especially when you're translating into English, if you go for a close translation of a Word text, for instance, into English, how many English readers would understand it without any footnote or endnote? Some of the things that you retain, or some of the things you literally transfer, literally translate into English, may not be understood by somebody who doesn't know anything about the Indian culture at all. Okay, so there is this problem. Okay, you cannot do justice to both the source text and the target audience. Okay, next slide, please. Huh. Now I have come to the important strategies that we often talk now. Earlier, people used to say free translation, faithful translation, etc., literal translation. But nowadays, after these are introduced by Lawrence Venuti, we only talk about domestication and foreignization as two important translation methods. And for this, the initial idea came from a Schleiermacher. Schleiermacher in 1813 was a German scholar, German philosopher. While talking about different types of translation, he said there are only two types of translation. One, either the translator leaves the author in peace as much as possible and moves the reader towards him. So you have to send the reader to the author, or he leaves the reader in peace as much as possible and moves the author towards him. So you hear in the second, you bring the author to the reader. In the first, you send the reader to the author. So what is domestication? Domestication is leaving the reader in peace and bringing the author towards him. It's a target oriented. Domestication is domesticating the text, domesticating the source text to suit the target audience, to suit the target socio-cultural context. Whereas foreignization is retaining the source elements as far as possible so that the text reads like a foreign text. Okay, foreignization. Okay, so you retain all the cultural component of the source text intact. You try to send the reader abroad. Like if you are reading a German text in English translation, you should it reads like a translation, and most of the German cultural aspects, cultural elements, cultural expressions are retained in the text. So you don't take it as something that is written in English, but you know very well that it is a text written in German originally, but you are reading in English translation. That kind of awareness comes only when you read a texts that are foreignized, where lots of cultural component of the source is kept intact. Okay. Next slide, please. I think more details about that. One point you have to remember. So when you domesticate the text, you translate it or you adapt it to suit the target socio-cultural context, your translation reads as though you are originally written in the target language. Okay, it reads as though you are originally writing. It doesn't read like a translation at all. But on the other hand, if you go for foreignizing method, the text reads like a translation. From the page 1, paragraph 1, the reader will become aware that this text is a translation. So whether you make your translation read like an original text written in the target language or read like a translation, it's up to you. You can choose either one, domestication or foreignization, depending on your purpose, your target audience. Okay, next slide, please. The other aspect related to domestication and foreignization is whether the translator is visible in the translation or not. Should we make the translator visible or invisible? See, in most of the Indian context, all the translations that have come into our own languages read as though they are originally written in our languages. Okay, so if it is a smooth translation, fluent translation, readable translation, the translator will not be visible. Only when you go for foreignizing, retain all the cultural elements and add a footnote, endnote here and there, the translator is very much visible. Okay, so you can test any translations that came into Odia, where can you feel the presence of the translator, or the translator is not visible at all, etc. Or in your translation also, whether any of your subjectivity makes its way into your translation, or you try to make it as objective as possible. Okay, so next slide, please. This is an Anglo-American translator. a famous one. He has done several translations. This is what he has to say about translation. He says translation is a pane of glass. No, yeah. You notice that it is there only when there are little imperfections like scratches, bubbles. Because in glass, generally you find these no scratches and bubbles. Ideally, there shouldn't be any. It should never call attention to itself. It means translation should never read like translation. Translation should be like a pane of glass without any imperfections like scratches or bubbles. You hardly notice it is there. Sometimes you go to a Starbucks or somewhere, you bump into that glass without realizing it. It's so clean. It so happens when you go to USA or other countries, not in India, of course. Okay, so here most of the Lawrence Venuti in his the invisibility of the translator, where he has looked at the 200 years history of Anglo-American translation tradition. He said 200 years is dominated by only the domesticating strategies. Anglo-American translators domesticated the foreign texts and written as though they were originally written in English. Okay, ignoring the foreign cultures. Okay, that is the superiority. This is where after translation studies took a cultural turn, we pay attention to the power equation between the two. Whether source culture is superior to target culture, or target culture is superior to inferior source culture, etc. The cultural gap between the two, cultural hierarchy becomes very important in selecting the strategy of translation. Okay, next slide, please. Huh. Okay, context. I think we are moving. Okay, I can finish it. So, all of you, when you're translating, like I'm sure you have done some research about this. Maybe what did you say? Madhusudan Dasu. Madhusudan Dasu. When you are translating, like first of all, you read about him. What was he? What did he write? What was he known for? What was his style? Was he a prolific writer? In what context is written? What motivated him? All that. See, so the contextual information is very important. Initially, in 50s and 60s, the beginning of the translation studies period, people paid attention only to the text, as though translation is something that is confined to a text, literary text, mere text, the words and sentences that you see. But then you know that for every text there is a context. You cannot separate the text from its context and look at the text in isolation. You can't read a text as a text without any relevance, without relating it to its context of production, in what context this text was written. Okay, and then its context of reception, dissemination. The contextual knowledge is very important in order to understand any text. All of you as literature students, you must be doing it. When you are reading a literary text written by somebody, first you read about his biography, the writer's biography. Okay, what inspired him, what influences worked on him. Okay, what made him to come up with this, how it was received, etc., etc. So in translation, it becomes more important. You can't just look at the text and then to go for a textual translation. That is the difference between a human translator and the machine translation. Machine doesn't have the context unless you provide all that contextual information to the machine computer. What all it has, only that words and sentences that it sees on the text. It's only text information. Contextual information it doesn't have. That's the reason why we don't have 100% successful machine translation even now. Okay, but when you, as a human being, when you are reading, you look at the context. That's why we say, oh, some of our political leaders also, they say something, and then when they are confronted in the media, no, I didn't mean it. I said it in a different context. Like it is reading, you are reading out of context. See, the context becomes very important. So when you are translating it, you have to know the context of production. In what context, what socio-cultural, historical context, or time also. When was it written? Okay, because time to time there will be differences. And the translation norms. See, translation norms is also very important. You have to know what is the tradition of translating into Odia or from Odia into English, how earlier translators have done, what is the practice, what is the method that they have followed. So there are clear norms in every culture, in any translation tradition. There are certain norms people followed. So you have to follow the same norms if you want your text to be accepted by your target audience. And then the next one is translation brief. If something is a commission translation, whoever commissions, they give you some do's and don'ts, some instructions as to how you have to translate, whether to give footnote or not, whether to retain Indian terms in transliteration or not to retain them, etc., etc. So that's called translation brief. Okay, so you have to follow that. And then the agency involved in the translation, the oh yeah, okay, it is related, the publisher and their role in the translation. Okay, so they do have their own role, especially in the case of literary translation. What you see, the final product, you can't say for everything translator is responsible. After translator submits his or her draft to the publisher, several people go through it and edit it, often without looking at the source text. They make changes to the text so that the text reads smooth and fluent, because the publisher is more interested in saleability, whether the book sells or not, whether he gets the money or not. Okay, so saleability and readability becomes important for them. Like, but for the translator, it is the closeness to the source text. Okay, but for publisher, they're not interested in those things, whether the book sells or not. Okay, how many copies can I sell? Okay, so, and then scopus theory is another one in translation studies. Scopus means, it's a Greek word, it means purpose. See, for any translation, there is a purpose. Without any purpose, why do you slog for a year or so in translating a text? There is a clear purpose. Okay, there could be various purposes for translating any given text. Mm, the last one, I think, polysystem theory, unless you are familiar with that, it's a little difficult, but I can say what position translated literature occupies in your literary polysystem, whether it is given equal importance to the literature originally written, or inferior or superior, or it enjoys equal status with the originally written literature in your language. You have to say, okay, polysystem theory, scopus theory, all these are very important in translation studies. And then simultaneously, while translating your text also, if you can read these things, you will be better translators. Okay, next slide please. These are some of the things maybe your teacher must have explained, like how dialect and sociolect and idiolect, when you are translating it from a regional language into English, how they create problems and create challenges. It's a challenge, dialect, sociolect, idiolect. But when you are translating into English, you use one standard English. That's your English. You can't experiment with dialects or sociolects. You can't use Scottish English or Cockney English or Black English. You cannot. We use standard English when you are translating it into English. But then the original regional languages have all those things, dialectal variations, sociolects, etc. So, and also another thing is intertextuality. If there are any references to other texts within the same culture, because see, Wadia text is written for Wadia speakers. They have a lot of shared component, shared cultural base, that makes it easy for the reader, for the writer to write something, because he need not explain everything, because they belong to the same cultural context. So readers will understand. But if you are translating the same text for somebody somewhere else who is living somewhere else on the continent, where somewhere English reader can be anybody. So when there is no shared knowledge, what do you do? How do you expect your reader to understand what you understood by reading your text? Okay, that becomes the challenge. And also in the case of English translations into English, we don't have a homogeneous target culture. See, if a text is translated in English, it can be anybody. Your reader can be anybody under the sun. Your reader can be anybody under the sun from any culture. Okay, so but how do you identify? Like earlier at the beginning, I said, before you translate, you have to know for whom you are translating, your target audience, and accordingly you have to translate. But in this case, how do you know who is going to be your target audience? From where? Is he non-Odia Indian reader, or reader abroad from USA, UK, all those English-speaking countries, or maybe non-native countries? Anybody who knows English can be a potential reader for your English translation. So this becomes a problem. When you are translating something from English into Odia, it would be easy, because it's only for your people you are translating. You know what things, what are acceptable, what are not acceptable, what are understood, etc. But the other way around into English, these are the major problems. I mean, we can only discuss the problems and challenges. There are no answers here. Okay. Next slide, please. Huh. See, for both domestication and foreignization, we can also use these words: source orientation and target orientation. Whether the orientation of the translator is on the source or the target, you are more tilted towards the source or the target. Okay, so and then when we say translating, especially into English, one of the purposes is it meant for an academic purpose? You want your English translation to be used as a textbook in a curriculum. For instance, Mahasweta Devi's translation by Spivak is used as a textbook, I think, in Columbia University. The best stories, no. So if that is your purpose for academic reasons to be used as a textbook, you go for a different method where you explain each and every word with footnote, endnote, everything you note down. But if it is meant for a general reader, if you are translating Mahasweta Devi's stories for general reader in Odia, then you don't need all those details, cultural details, etc., etc. Okay, so most of the translations done by nowadays, I think most of the translations from regional languages into English are done by academia, like your madam has done one. So if the teachers, English teachers, is working in English departments are translating regional literature in English, mainly they aim for that. I mean, somewhere it might be used as a textbook because most of the foreign countries, they do have Indian component. They read Indian literature, and Indian professors are there. They use these, make use of these textbooks. Dalit writing is used in some places, in some universities, etc. Okay, so scholarly translation, we call it a scholarly translation, which reads like a translation, but they want that kind of thing. That is what it is meant for. So the purpose, it's a purpose driven. What is the purpose of your translation? Okay, accordingly choose how to translate it. Okay. So I think I have explained the second one also. For domestic, this is another thing. So, see, some of them they say, okay, my intended audience for this English translation is only domestic audience. Somebody who translated a Telugu novel into English, they said we don't aim for international readership. It is only for non-Telugu Indian readers who can read English. So if it is for domestic consumption, you don't have to explain many things because we have something called pan-Indian culture. We don't have to explain everything. But if it is for readership abroad, you need to explain everything, even the names of the gods, names of the festivals, everything needs to be explained. Okay. So next slide, please. Mm, yeah. So if you look at any translations from regional languages into English, you find this feature. One is hybridity. Like lot of native idiom and literal translation you find in these English translations, and lot of Indianisms because they cannot be translated. They retain these Indian terms. Okay, these are called Indianisms. Lots of Indianisms you find in these English translations. So sometimes too extreme. Sometimes you find this English text. It is written in English, but it's not understood by the English readers because of lot of Indianisms are retained, lot of literal translations. Our native idiom is literally translated. So those who are not familiar with our culture can't understand. They become hybrid texts. And then because of that, like for instance, we were talking about dialect and socialect and how it is difficult to translate. So people do add, translators do add a note introduction. In their introduction they explain all these things. The original was written in such and such a dialect, but it could not be translated. So most of these texts come with paratexts where certain things are explained, certain things which could not be carried over are explained in the footnote, in the introduction given by the translator's note explains. Even Lakshmi Armstrong's Bhama's translations, if you see, they come with elaborate notes where she explains everything. And extensive notes and glossary is also one of the features of these translations into English. Okay, next slide, please. I think we can skip this. Okay, skip this. I wanted to give an example of Telugu text, but okay, this also you can skip. What else do we have? Yeah, skip it. Okay, now I'm coming to the last slide, I think. Yeah. So now, because of the development of technology, latest technology that is available to the present generation of the translators now, these things are possible earlier which these were not possible. For instance, the internet has made possible virtual teams, a group of people working from different locations using computer networks. You can work, take up a project with somebody else who is living somewhere else. Through internet you can, most of the software companies, they do have their people working in the same project but in different time zones. So it's possible. So when it comes to translators, you can team up with certain people, go for collaborative translations or projects, pooling your resources. So because internet makes it possible, you don't have to be physically together at the same place in order to work on a project. For instance, earlier I was talking about indirect translations, where you don't have subject language experts who can translate from that particular language. You go for an indirect translation, you translate from English. But nowadays people are not going for indirect translation, but they are going for collaborative translation. For instance, I don't know Odia and you don't know Telugu, but both of us can collaborate. You know Odia and I know English. Both of us can work together using internet. We can translate directly. I can translate something directly from Odia into Telugu with your cooperation. So you sit in your state, I sit in my place, and both of us can collaboratively work. So that that way we can avoid the mediation of Hindi or English. Okay, that is possible. Most of the people are doing one from the source language, one from the target language, come together and go for a translation. Okay. Uh, Thank you so much. I think I tested your patience for patient listening. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ma'am, am I
Yeah.
audible? Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so very much. That was indeed a very wonderful session, and I hope students enjoyed it. They learned a lot from it because, as I told you, we are going through a phase where we are translating a book. So they must have gained a lot from it. So from here, I would move into the question answer session, ma'am, with your permission.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure, sure. Yeah, yeah,
So
sure.
who will be the first person with the question? Ma'am, here is one our student. She will tell her name and then she will move on to the question.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Please, please.
Good evening, ma'am. Am I audible?
Hmm, hmm. Yes, yes.
So, ma'am, my question is, while I was translating a text from Korea to English, I was not
It's not clear, Amma. It's not. Kiran, who is speaking?
what
Who is speaking? I mean, can you turn on your video? Can you turn on your video? Whoever is speaking. Come closer to the computer. You will be more audible. Urmila, okay. Am I audible now?
ma'am, we can hear you.
Yeah, Urmila, I think she wanted to ask me a question, but I couldn't hear her. Can she talk now? You can post it also in the chat if it is a problem.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah.
Ma'am, my question is my name is Anjali and I'm a second year student. I was translating a text from Odia to English and I was doing it with a friend of mine who is from West Bengal. So while I was translating, as I am Odia, I know the cultural references, but she does not know that. So I did the literal word to word translation. But then while we were editing, there were many instances in which there were suggestions as to if we are to change the cultural references or are we to keep. For example, we did the text of Madhusudan Das in which the word Kalinga and Utkal is used. So this is very cultural to us. We cannot exactly change. Like if we say Utkal Mata or the state of Kalinga or the nation of Kalinga. So when we literally translate it into English, the entire sense is lost. So what should we do in that?
I think that's a very tough question, but a very interesting one. This is the problem faced by many of us, many every translator, for instance. One is the dilemma is whether to retain the native identity. When you say Kalinga or Utkal, it's your identity, native identity. But when you change it, and then yeah, that identity is lost. So many people are very fond of their retaining their native identity. Why should I change? So. And as I said, it depends on your purpose. For whom are you translating? Is it for non-Vodia Indian readers or readers abroad? If it is for non-Vodia Indian readers within the country, you can retain everything even without explanation, without any footnote. But if it is meant for readers abroad, you have to, even if you can retain, even there you can retain if you think that that's an important thing related to the cultural component of the Odia and how can you change it if you can retain, but you will have to add an elaborate explanation to that. Okay, so
Yes,
it's up to you. It's up
you
to
are
you.
absolutely correct, because even I was thinking the same. Even if it is like, as you said, retaining the words, even if it is meant for the people inside Orissa, Utkala and Kalinga, these are very cultural and historical
Yes,
specific words.
yes.
So even the people from inside India may not sometime get the exact connotation of the word that we are referring to. So it is always better, I think, to retain the same words and explain it elaborately at the end in the end note. Thank you so very much for the same, ma'am. Now I will move onward to the next student if anybody has a question. Yeah. Ma'am, I hand over the mic to another student called Simran from the first semester.
Okay, okay.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Ma'am, I'm Simran, and during my UG days, I was working on this project where we were translating some of the Sambalpuri songs into English. And Sambalpuri is a dialect. It's not a proper language; it's a dialect. And I talked to the lyricist about some words. I had some doubts, and he told me that these words they don't actually have a meaning. They are just random jiggles. But we
Okay.
were supposed to translate it. We were supposed to add like some creativity into it. So what is your suggestion whenever this case
See, some of these lullabies are nursery rhymes. They don't have any meaning. If you look at any nursery rhyme, Baba, Black Sheep, or anything, it's meant for something else, but it makes rhythmic and all. They don't have meaning. You know, so that is one of the problems that is there in any translation of poems or songs. The musical component is important, not just the meaning. That's why same thing goes with poetry also. Poetry is not just the content, the form is also important. Actually, form is more important than the content. What the word says, what how the word is, what how it is pronounced, etc. The form becomes more important than the content. So if you just take the meaning and translate, then it will not be a poem. Poem has your translation is also a poem, right? Your translation is to be accepted as a poem. It has to have those poetic qualities, right? So this is a major problem. I see, for most of the things we don't have clear cut answers. You can say, okay, yes, you have to do it, or I cannot say, because it all depends on your context, depends on your purpose, etc. So it's not like yes or no. Okay, but see, whatever you feel best in the given context, that would be the valid reason. And if anybody asks, where did you translate, where did you create this new thing, when the original doesn't have a meaning, you created this, you can
There is a folk song, Jhari Re Jhara, and we were translating this for a program that was to be aired on All India Radio. So we were having a discussion about the musical qualities and also about the richness of our culture. So just to increase the the number of audience, we were trying to translate it into English, and at the end the director and the lyricist and we the students who were assigned the work, we agreed to keep it inside brackets, and we just wrote regional jiggles. That's
Oh,
it.
yeah, I think in subtitles also people write that. If you cannot
Yes,
translate into
yes, ma'am.
subtitles, like there are certain objectionable words and all, they just say rather than translating that he used an abusive word or something. They say instead of giving that abuse, they just report. Yeah, there are certain mechanisms to avoid that, but a good attempt, Amma. So poetry translation or songs translation, like I wanted to pay attention to the songs. Like films are remade in different languages, how they translate the songs when they remake films. Like for instance, Roja is there in several languages. I think Telugu, Tamil, many languages, but they retain that. When I hear the Tamil song, I know that it is Roja, that particular song. Maybe the lyrics are different, but the tone and the music and all, the same thing is retained, but lyrics are changed here and there. Huh? There are certain issues. Thank you. Very good question.
Ma'am, we do have another student who is present online. I think she is going to raise a question. I think it is Pratiksha. Pratiksha, are you there online?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, please raise your question.
Hello, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. Uh, as a research scholar who is interested in Indian literary texts, I wanted to ask you, like, in case of translated text, what we do is we do add notes and we specify why we chose the text and the particular translator. But what if there is no translation? For example, there are several texts that has not been translated from the original language to English. So, should what do you suggest? Like, should we take the text or should we translate it on our own? Because that would be a very Herculean task. What should we do, ma'am?
I think I couldn't get your text. Like, why do you need the text? If something is not translated into English or not available in English translation, if you are reading the source, what is your question? I mean, it's not very clear to me.
Ma'am, I am doing it on like my PhD on forest fictions and eco fictions.
Okay,
So,
okay.
so mostly those are tribal texts and are not
Now
translated.
I got the question. I mean, see, so for your research, if you are using some of these texts which are not been translated, that is your question, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So see, people, scholars, they themselves translate, and not the entire text, but extracts here and there, parts and bits and parts. They themselves translate and include it in their dissertation. Yeah, because you read it and you understand it, but then your readers, your examiners, your PhD thesis, whoever examines, they may not know. So if the text is not available in English translation, you can do it entire thing and then get it published as an independent text, or for your own research, whatever the sections that are important are related to the discussion or the points you are mentioning, you are raising, those particular sections you have to translate, and you have to say at the beginning, all translations are mine. Somewhere you have to note. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Ma'am, we will move on to another student, Pratik, and I believe this is going to be the last question for today's session. Over to you, Pratik.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am. This is Pratik. My question is, what is a translator's visibility, like, and how extend one translator can like go by that?
Oh, very, very good question. Very good question. Yeah. So, um, see, if the translator goes for a foreignizing method and retains the cultural component of the source, like terms and expressions as it is, like when you retain them, what do? You just transliterate it into the script of the target language. Okay, sometimes you may add explanation somewhere in the footnote or endnote, or otherwise you don't. Okay, so if the translation reads like a translation with all the interventions of the translator, like you add a footnote somewhere, sometimes within brackets also people explain. Okay, so all those explanations and footnotes remind the reader that it is a mediated communication, mediated text, and translated, somebody is mediating between the source text and the translation. Okay, so you make your presence felt by retaining lots of source component and adding an explanation within the text or within the parenthesis or within the footnote, or giving an elaborate endnote explaining everything, each and every socio-cultural concept Okay, that's how you make the text, you make the translator visible. Okay, so and then second one, to what extent? Okay, this is also a very good question, and this is related to your purpose. If the translator, like as I was explaining it earlier, I have published a paper in translation today by NTM. I think December last year or something, 22 December or something. Uh, I have examined two different translations of one classical Telugu drama. So one translator, he works in Wisconsin, USA. For the consumption of the American readers, he translated and published there uh, in USA. So he has elaborated his text, his notes and other appendices are more than the text. Each and every concept meticulously has explained to the audience, to the target audience who do not know anything about the Indian culture. Okay, so translator is very much visible everywhere. You can see everything is explained. But if you go for a smooth reading, if you give more importance to readable text to read well, okay, if it reminds on every page, every level that it is a translation, not many would read. Like it sometimes it happens when you open a book, you want to read it, but it doesn't read well, then you stop reading. So it defeats the purpose. If some for general readers, at least for a particular purpose, if you're reading the text, yes, you take the pains, you do your homework, you refer to online resources to understand what is mentioned, what does it mean here in the source culture. But for general readers who would be happy with the storyline or the plot, they think that it is unnecessary. So readability suffers if you include too much of the source. Okay, so if you make it read smooth and fluent, translator is not visible at all. They don't know that it is a translation. If they think that oh, it looks like it is originally written in my language, then it means the translator is not visible. He is not making himself visible, himself or herself. But if you include everything, then at every stage they know that okay, somebody is explaining it to you. Okay, it is the version, the text is originated in some other culture and it is translated into this language, and translator is here, he is explaining in the footnote or in the text itself within parenthesis. Okay, and the degrees, I think one has to decide. Even if you say free translation or faithful translation, how much freedom can one exercise? That is a big question. Generally, people in the Indian context, all our Puranas and Itihasas, and even the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, they have been written and rewritten several times over and over again within the same language. Okay, but they are all new writings. Okay, they never went for faithful reproductions. Okay, they exercised out, they have taken all the freedom. So that the target text read like as though Mahabharata in Telugu. If I say, look at Nannaya's Mahabharata, he was the first one to translate Mahabharata into Telugu in 11th century. But it is taken as the Telugu Mahabharata. Mahabharata as though Nannaya is written originally. Nobody looks at it as a translation. Okay, so this is the tradition. The Indian tradition is for rewritings and free writings which read like original writings. Okay, you don't remind the reader that okay, this is a translation by including something that is not there in his culture, something alien to him. Okay, so how much you can make yourself visible or invisible, it depends. As I said, I said there are no clear cut answers. You cannot say yes or no. It all depends. Okay.
Thank you so very much, ma'am. I don't think there are any more questions. Any more questions from the students or anyone? Okay. Sanjit, any question from you? No. Ma'am, I think that is the end of the question answer session for today. And on behalf of the Department of English Language and Literature, I thank you so very much from the core of my heart that you easily accepted my proposal, my invitation to come as a resource person and deliver an online lecture. I very well understand for the last 3 days you have been out, and in your busy schedule, even I kept calling you, reminding you, but you never ever made me feel that you are not comfortable talking to me in your journey or in your busy days. And that gave me a very pleasant experience. And we are actually learning a lot. And I hope our students even would have understood the basics of translation, because this is the initiative stage that they are going through, and your lecture helped us a lot. And I am eagerly waiting for 9th of this month when I can meet you physically. So most welcome to Koraput, ma'am. We are here to welcome you with open arms. I believe you will like the place, our students, our department even. Thank you so much. We will meet again, ma'am. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I enjoy speaking to students, and this is my topic. Like about cricket, I drink cricket, I eat cricket. They say so. Same thing I say. I eat translation. I drink translation. Something like that. Because I did my PhD in translation studies, and I've been working in translation studies. This is the only thing. This is my life. Okay. So you're always welcome, students. If you have any queries, you can always mail me. I'll be more than happy to answer you if I can be of some help.
Thank
Any
you.
translation, okay? So
Even our Vice Chancellor sir wanted to join the session because he's very much interested in translation, but he had some other engagements, and on the top he was hurt few days back. So he couldn't
oh,
join, and he has given his best wishes through WhatsApp, saying that the department is actually doing good. We are really honored, and I'm really thankful to you that you joined the session, ma'am. See you
thank
soon.
you,
Thank you.
thank you, thank you. Bye bye, bye bye,
Bye-bye, ma'am. Thank you, dear
bye.
students.
Bye.
Oh, for the day. Thank you. With this, I wind up the session, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. See you on 9th.
See you,
Okay.
ma'am. See you soon on 9th.
Even
Waiting
I
for
am
you.
eager on this side. Also, I am also equally eager to see you, meet you, and all
Most
those
welcome,
words I
ma'am.
want to repeat even with reference to you also. Whatever you said, it applies to you as well. You're such a nice lady, and
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
okay, ma. Okay, bye, bye.